All right, so today we're going in a slightly different direction for this deep dive. You guys sent in these excerpts from Growing Beyond the Syllabus.
Okay.
And get this, it's a self-help book, but it's written by a teenager
Oh, wow.
for teenagers,
Interesting.
which is kind of unusual, right?
Yeah, you don't see that every day. It seems
It's,
like he felt like most self-help books out there just weren't speaking to his generation.
yeah, he basically said that they were either way too complex or they were outdated or just totally out of touch with what it's actually like to be a teenager today. Like they needed advice from someone who gets it.
Right.
So he decided to write one himself.
I love that.
Pretty cool, right?
It is. It's fascinating to see that perspective.
Yeah.
And he really focuses on these topics that he felt were overlooked, like things like dealing with pressure and building confidence and even practical life skills like managing your finances.
Totally. And that's actually something that you specifically mentioned was that you were looking for that actionable advice. Like, give me the real world tips that I can actually use.
Exactly.
So let's dive into this young author's perspective and see what kind of nuggets of wisdom we can unearth.
Let's do it.
Okay, so he starts off with this really intriguing concept that he calls the third ray.
Okay.
So imagine you're facing like a tough decision, right?
Right.
He says instead of just going with your gut or listening to the first person who gives you advice, you should always try to find a third fresh perspective. So it's about taking that extra step to cut through the noise and get a more well-rounded view.
I like that. It's like taking a step back to gain a little bit of clarity, especially in today's world when everybody has an opinion and there's just information coming at us from every direction.
Right.
He then very cleverly connects this to those classic conformity experiments by Solomon Asch.
Oh, yeah.
You heard of those?
The Asch conformity experiments? Yeah, they were wild.
Yeah. So if you need a refresher, they basically showed how easily our own judgment can be swayed by others, even when we know that they're wrong.
Totally.
And the author actually uses a really interesting example from his own life
Okay.
when he was choosing his academic path in school. He said all of his friends were choosing science.
Of course, because it's, the smart kids.
Right, because it's the smart choice. It's the
Right.
prestigious choice.
Exactly.
But he was really drawn to commerce
Interesting.
and talk about pressure,
Yeah, huge pressure.
especially as a teenager.
You're hardwired to want to fit in at that age.
Absolutely. And he actually
Wow.
chose commerce even though it meant going against the grain and kind of facing those societal expectations.
Wow.
He really emphasizes this idea of trusting your gut and thinking for yourself even when it feels uncomfortable.
Such a powerful message, especially for young people who are trying to figure out their own path.
Yes.
And you know what? That actually ties in perfectly with his next big idea, which is all about self-belief.
Yes.
So he really emphasizes this idea that what you believe you become.
He does, and he uses this really powerful analogy of a young sapling to illustrate that point, stressing that just as a sapling needs the right nutrients to grow,
Mm.
teenagers need self-belief and confidence to reach their full potential.
I love that analogy because it really makes you think about the environment you're creating for yourself to actually thrive in.
It does.
And I think it's important to point out here that he's not talking about some kind of vague, mystical, like, just believe in yourself and things will magically happen.
Right.
He's talking about self-belief that's rooted in action.
Exactly.
So it's about recognizing your strengths, taking those small steps outside of your comfort zone, and then building that confidence through actual experience.
Yes, and he actually backs this up with this great example of his friend who defied the odds and started a successful business despite everyone telling her to quit,
Oh, wow.
which is amazing.
I love that because it's like you're not just reading about this concept in a vacuum, you're seeing it play out in the real world.
Yeah, it makes it relatable.
And it makes it feel attainable, right?
Absolutely.
It's like he's saying, look, I'm not just making this up,
Exactly.
So now he kind of goes into this whole idea of positivity, which you had mentioned you wanted to unpack a bit. And I have to say, he doesn't just give those like typical think positive kind of platitudes.
Right.
He actually digs a little deeper.
Yeah, he talks about this idea that our thoughts and words can actually have a real impact on our well-being.
Yeah, and he even brings up that Masaru Emoto study. I don't know if you've heard of this one.
I have. It's the one with the water molecules, right?
Yes.
Where they like change based on
different words and emotions.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But I do want to say that obviously his methods have been questioned by a lot of scientists. So it's important to kind of approach those findings with a critical eye.
For sure, for sure. And to be clear in the book, the author kind of presents it more as like a thought experiment than hard science.
Right.
Like what if our thoughts and words did have this tangible impact on us, even on like a molecular level? you know?
It's a very powerful image.
It is. It's
Yeah.
really powerful.
Yeah, and it kind of sets the stage for what he talks about next, which is positive affirmations.
Okay, so instead of just wishing for good things to happen, it's about actively shaping your mindset.
Exactly.
Okay.
With those positive statements, like, I am capable, I will succeed, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like giving yourself those little pep talks throughout the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there actually is some research out there that suggests that affirmations, when you do them consistently, they can actually reduce stress, they can boost your confidence, and they can even help to improve your performance.
Wow.
It is pretty cool.
That is cool. And he actually gives a bunch of different examples in the book of affirmations you can use, like, I am grateful for the opportunities in my life, or I attract positive people and experiences.
Love that one.
And he even talks about a friend of his who used affirmations to stay motivated when his business was going through a really rough time.
I love that he uses these concrete examples from his own life and the lives of people around him.
It makes it feel so much more relatable.
Yes.
Because, he's not just pulling the stuff out of thin air, like he's actually seen it work.
Right. It's like he's living proof in a way.
Exactly. And it all ties back to that idea of self-belief that we were talking about before.
Exactly.
It's like you're kind of rewiring your brain to focus on the positive.
Yeah, you're shifting that internal dialogue from doubt and negativity to one of self-belief and possibility.
I can see how that would be super helpful for teenagers, especially, they're dealing with so much change and uncertainty.
Absolutely.
It's like giving yourself a pep talk from the inside out.
I love that.
But it's not all about internal work, right? He also talks about the importance of your external environment, like who you surround yourself with.
Yes, and he makes this really interesting point that our friends, their attitudes and their habits can actually rub off on us whether we realize it or not.
Oh, it's so true. And you know how they say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with?
Right.
He's basically echoing that idea.
Right. Totally.
And encouraging teenagers to be really mindful of their social circle.
Absolutely. And he gives some very concrete advice here as well.
Yeah.
He says, take stock of your friendships. Which ones leave you feeling energized and inspired? And which ones leave you feeling drained or down? And it's not about ditching your friends, but maybe just being a little bit more intentional about where you're investing your time and energy.
But that's such a good point.
Yeah, it's about creating a supportive ecosystem for yourself.
Oh, okay. That's huge.
Yeah.
So another part of the book that really stood out to me was his take on dealing with challenges in general. And he makes this really key distinction between reacting and responding,
Oh, that's a good one.
which I think is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to just react emotionally in the heat of the moment.
Oh, yeah, especially as a teenager.
Yeah, right. But he's really encouraging teenagers, and I think this applies to all of us,
For sure.
to take a step back and respond thoughtfully instead of just reacting.
Yeah, it's about taking that pause before you say or do something that you might regret later.
Exactly. And he actually offers this really great framework for handling criticism specifically.
Oh, tell me about this.
He calls it the triple S approach.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us.
Okay, so it's all about taking a breath and responding intentionally.
Okay.
So the first S is stop.
Okay.
You literally hit the pause button on your reaction, before you say or do anything impulsively.
Let's take a beat.
Exactly. And then the second S is scrutinize.
Okay.
So you take a moment to actually examine the criticism that you're receiving.
Okay.
Is it valid? Is there something you can learn from it?
Yeah. Don't just dismiss it out of hand.
Exactly. And then the final S is speak.
Okay.
So once you've taken a moment to really process everything, you respond thoughtfully, whether you're acknowledging the feedback or offering your own perspective.
I love how simple and actionable that is.
Yeah.
Like you can literally visualize yourself going through those 3 steps.
Totally.
It's like a cheat code for dealing with those awkward or confrontational moments.
Exactly. And he even takes it a step further, and he talks about applying this same principle to making mistakes and embracing failure.
Which is so important because, let's face it, we all make mistakes.
All the time. Yeah.
Part of life.
And he actually quotes Thomas Edison in this section, which I love.
What does he say?
He says, I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that great? It's all about perspective.
Really is.
Yeah.
So he's basically encouraging young people to reframe failure as an opportunity for learning and growth.
Yes.
Instead of looking at it as a setback.
It's about developing that resilience
Yes.
to keep going even when things get tough.
And speaking of things that can be tough, let's talk about the practical stuff, because I know you're interested in things like financial literacy and time management.
Yes.
And the author actually dedicates a good chunk of the book to those topics. And he starts off by dropping this truth bomb about compound interest.
Yes, he does. He uses this great analogy. He calls it the bonus dilemma.
Okay.
Imagine somebody offers you a choice. You can either receive 1,000 rupees every single day for 20 days, or you can start with a single 10 pays coin that doubles in value every day for those same 20 days.
Okay.
Which would you choose? Honestly, I would probably go with the 1,000 rupees a day.
Right. It seems like a no-brainer.
It does.
But here's the thing. That tiny 10 pays coin, with the power of compounding, ends up being worth way more in the long run.
Really?
Yeah, and it perfectly illustrates how starting small and being consistent can lead to these really massive gains over time.
Wow, that's a really powerful visual.
It is.
I can see why he used that analogy.
Yeah.
So how does he connect this back to something that teenagers can actually do, like in their own lives?
So he dives into the world of investing, and he talks about how important it is to start early, even with small amounts of money.
Okay.
And he actually introduces this concept called systematic investment plans, or SIPs, where you're regularly investing a fixed amount of money, and then that money is growing over time thanks to the magic of compound interest.
Okay, so it's about building those positive financial habits early on.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not just about the money itself. It's about the habits that you're building around money.
That makes sense.
And he actually makes this really great point. He says, debt is selling our future financial independence. Saving is earning our future financial independence.
Ooh, I like that.
It's a good one, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
It really makes you think about, the long-term impact of the financial choices that we're making today.
For sure.
And the best part is he doesn't just stop at money. He actually applies this whole principle of compounding to our habits in general.
Okay.
So even small positive changes, when they're repeated consistently, can have this really significant impact on our lives.
I've heard that before, but it's always good to be reminded. How does he break that down?
So he gets a little mathematical here, but just bear with me for a second.
Okay.
So first he asks us to calculate 1 to the 365th power, which equals 1.
Right, which represents no change.
Yeah, no change.
Right.
Okay, but then he bumps it up just a notch.
Okay.
And he says calculate 1.01 to the 365th power.
Okay.
And you know what that equals?
What's that equal?
That equals 37.7.
Wait, really? Just from that tiny 1% difference?
Just from that 1% difference compounded over time.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That's incredible.
So he's making this point about consistency and the power of even small improvements.
So it's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Exactly.
It's about playing the long game and building those positive habits bit by bit.
It's those small, consistent actions that add up to big results over time. And speaking of time, he actually dedicates a whole section to time management.
Of course, because time is so precious.
It is, and he starts off by hitting us with this really thought-provoking statistic.
Okay.
He says that, on average, we only have 18 truly free years in our entire lives.
18 years? That's it?
That's it. And that's after you subtract the time that we spend sleeping, working, all of those essential activities.
Wow, that really puts things in perspective.
It does, doesn't it?
It does. So how do we make the most of that time, especially with all of the demands on teenagers these days?
Well, he has a really great analogy here.
Okay.
He compares tracking our time to tracking our money.
Okay.
And he encourages us to identify our own personal time leaks.
Time leaks. I like that. What is a time leak?
A time leak is any activity that's kind of draining our hours without giving us a whole lot of value in return.
Ah, okay, got it. Yeah.
Scrolling on your phone.
Exactly. Or binge watching that show that you've already seen 5 times.
Oh, yeah.
You get the idea.
Totally. So it's about being more mindful of where our time is going and making those conscious choices about how we spend it.
Precisely.
So then what are some of the actual tools he recommends for doing that? Because I know that can be really tough.
Yeah, so he actually suggests 2 really practical time management techniques.
Okay, let's hear them.
One is called the Pomodoro technique.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's where you break your work down into intervals, right?
Exactly. It's 25-minute intervals with short breaks in between.
It's really great for focus and productivity. It forces you to kind of get up and move around a little bit, too.
Right, which is so important.
It is. And the other technique he recommends is called the Eisenhower Matrix.
Okay.
Have you heard of that one?
I haven't heard of that one.
Okay, so the Eisenhower Matrix is this really cool system for prioritizing tasks based on their urgency and importance.
Oh, okay.
So it helps you to kind of like visually map out your to-do list
Okay.
and really focus on what actually matters most.
I love that because I think so often we get caught up in those urgent but not important tasks,
Absolutely.
and then we don't have time or energy left for the things that really matter.
Exactly. And I think those are both such useful tools, especially for teenagers who are juggling school and extracurriculars and friends and, just life.
Social media.
Oh, yeah.
So much coming at them.
So much.
It's about equipping them with those tools to manage it all.
Exactly. To stay organized, to avoid feeling overwhelmed.
I love it. Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive.
Oh, really has.
We've covered so much ground. We talked about challenging assumptions, the power of self-belief, practical tips for positivity, and even those really concrete strategies for managing time and money.
It's incredible to think that this wisdom is coming from a teenager.
I know, it just goes to show that you don't have to have it all figured out to share valuable insights.
Totally. And I think there's a lot that we can all learn from his perspective.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I have one final question for you and for all of our listeners out there to ponder.
Okay.
If you could go back and give your younger self just one piece of advice from everything we've talked about today, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Mm.
I'm going to have to think about that one.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a big one, but a good one.
It is.
So we'll leave everyone with that little nugget to ponder.
Love it.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into those topics that spark your curiosity.